Welcome to Bible Prophecy Now with Rabbi Joe Bell. In this program, Rabbi Bell presents a clearer understanding of prophecies, past, present, and future. In this time of utter confusion and dread, tune in to Bible Prophecy Now with Rabbi Joe Bell for greater insights of the truth of God's Word and God's prophetic timing. Now join us and let's learn together. And now, Rabbi Joe Bell.
Hey, shalom friends, this is Rabbi Joe. Welcome to Bible Prophecy Now. We're going to continue last week's message called When the War with Iran Will Restart. Just as I think that's what we called it. When will the war, not if, not maybe will the war with Iran restart, not but when will it restart? It's going to restart. And one of the points I didn't make last week is that in Islam, if you read in the Quran, it gives permission for Muslims to lie for the cause of Allah. So according to their book, Allah is not the God of the Bible. You've got to understand that. Allah is not the God of Israel. He's not, it's like Buddha. Buddha is not the God of Israel. Krishna is not the God of Israel. Odin is not the God of Israel, and Allah is not the God of Israel. He's the God of Islam. He's a false God. Okay, he's a God with a little g. Okay, the God of the Bible is Yud He Vav He. In Hebrew, we don't pronounce his name. As Jews, we don't pronounce the name. Christians often call it Yahweh or Jehovah, but it's YHVH in English. In Hebrew, it's Yud He Vav He, which Yud He Vav He is the Hebrew spelling of YHVH. And so we're told not to pronounce it. In fact, in 500 manuscripts of the New Testament, the original Greek manuscripts, in over 500 of those manuscripts, I spoke to two professors of New Testament Greek at Christian universities, and I asked them, I said, is the name, the sacred name, Yud He Vav He, is it ever pronounced in those New Testament? And they said, no, it's not in there. Even though they could have used Greek letters to make Yud He Vav He, they didn't do it. They called the Father Pater, meaning Father. They called him Abba, meaning Daddy. They called him, I think it was Kurios or something like that. It's a Greek word, and it means, it's a word for Lord, like Adonai. Jews call the word for Lord Adonai. And the Greeks, so that people who did the Greek New Testament used the word coming from the Greek word Kurios or Kuriakon, which is the word for church. Kuriakon, it's where we get the word like Charlie Kirk. Kirk comes, it means, a Kirk is like a Germanic or English Anglo-Saxon word for church, is a Kirk. Dunkirk, where it was across the ocean from this channel from England into France, where the soldiers got trapped in World War II. Dunkirk. The Kirk is the church. It means church. And so the word ekklesia is not the word for church. Ekklesia means the people. It means the assembly or the congregation. But not your father, not your grandfather, not your pastor, but 2,000 years ago, when they translated the Bible, they put the word church, and maybe even 500 years ago when they made the King James, and they translated the Bible, the King James, into English, they took the word ekklesia and they translated it as church. But the word for church is actually kirk, or it comes from the Greek kuriakon, and it means building. Okay, ekklesia means the people. So they did that because they were intentionally trying to separate this new institution they call the church from the Jews. They didn't want, the people who did this were anti-Semitic, and they wanted to separate from the Jews, so they created a new thing called the church. Now, am I saying the church isn't real? No. Gentiles who became believers and wanted to call their institution the church, they have a right. They want to call it the Honda. They want to call it the Kawasaki. They want to call it the mosque. Who am I to say no? But that's not what the word means. The word ekklesia doesn't mean church. I'm just telling you that for your information. You can look it up, Kariakon. But anyway, let's continue about the coming great war with radical Islam. So get your Bibles. In Daniel chapter 8, the prophet has a vision of himself being in ancient Persia. Daniel sees a ram with 2 horns standing by the Ulai Canal. One horn was longer than the other, and with the longer one coming up last. Now, horns in the Bible and in this chapter represent kings or rulers or presidents. Interestingly, we are told that the longer horn came up after the first horn, as though it was added at a later time. In verse 4, Daniel sees the ram. There's a ram and a goat in Daniel chapter 8. He sees the ram butting westward, northward, and southward, and no other beasts representing kings or kingdoms could stand before him. And prophetically, friends, a beast prophetically represents a nation. A beast represents a nation. So when I've taught about the beast over the last few weeks, if you had watched my teachings, but you can go to YouTube and watch them, my teachings on the beast. You can go to my website and see my teachings on the beast, or read them or listen to them. And what I taught is that the beast, the image of the beast, and maybe Aaron will show that image that was given to the United Nations. The body of the beast that was given to the United Nations has the body of a leopard. And the Bible tells us in Daniel 7, verse 1, and Revelation 13, starting in verse 1, that the beast has the body of a leopard, has the face of a lion, it has the hands, the paws of a grizzly bear, and it has and Daniel 7, it actually has the wings of an eagle, and so anyway, each one of those animals represent a nation. And so what nations do they represent? Well, what I said last week in my teachings, if you watched it, was that the body of the leopard represents Iran, the Persian leopard. The bear, the feet of the beast, represents Russia. The feet of the beast represents Russia. The face is England. England used to be our ally, and I've been waiting for England to turn against us, and now they have. Their Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, would not support us in the war with Iran, and they would not, even though their oil comes through the Straits of Hormuz, England would not help the United States. In fact, many countries in Europe who are supposed to be our allies would not allow us to launch our aircraft from their bases. And this is just crazy. I think England owns an island off the coast of India called Diego Garcia, where we have a base, and we launch a lot of our bombers and big, large aircraft. They didn't want to let us launch from there. They finally relented and let us do it. So let me go on here. So you can see that our relationship with the world is changing. We don't have many friends left, and Europe is not a friend to us. The only friend we have is Israel. The only country that will have our backs today is Israel. And it's interesting, what country do most people, half the population of America, seem to hate? Israel. The only country that has our back and would fight for us is Israel. There is no other country. But yet half of America hates Israel. It makes no sense, does it? But it isn't, spiritual evil. Evil makes no sense. Evil is irrational. And evil has taken over the minds of millions of Americans. And in his book, The Return of the Gods, Jonathan Cahn, the prophet Jonathan Cahn, talks about how evil false gods can actually take over entire cities, and that's what's happening in this life we're living in this world and the United States. False gods are taking over complete regions, states, cities. And let me give you an example. When Paul went to Ephesus, they didn't want him there because he was preaching against Diana of the Ephesians. And Diana of the Ephesians was their goddess, and so they all loved Diana of the Ephesians. And so the Ephesians used to build. They used to build idols. So people made money building idols to Diana. They would have priests would make money because they would have services where they would worship whatever way they worshipped in pagan worship to celebrate Diana. And so the whole culture was based around Diana. They probably had pizza. You could probably get a Diana pizza in Ephesus back in those days. The whole culture was supportive of Diana. And there's entire cities like Boston and Provincetown on Cape Cod in Massachusetts that support LGBTQ. The whole city supports it. And Hollywood, Los Angeles, is completely pro-LGBTQ. That's not just politics, that's a spirit. All right, let's go on. Okay, so in Daniel chapter 8, the prophet has a vision, and he's by the Ulai Canal. And I told you about the horns coming out of, he sees a ram, and the horns represent a leader, a ruler, a president. Interestingly, we are told that this longer horn on the ram comes up first, and though it is added at a later time, in verse 4 of Daniel 8, he sees the ram butting westward, northward, and southward. And no other beasts representing kings or kingdoms could stand before him, nor was there anyone to rescue from his power, but he did as he pleased and magnified himself. Daniel 8:4, Daniel observes a male goat coming from the west. That's us. Because remember, I've told you before, everything in the Bible, the compass of the Bible, the west is Europe and America is the west. Canada and South America, that would be the west. The south is Africa, because anything south of Jerusalem would be the south. And then the north would be Russia and Turkey and Lebanon and Syria. That's the north of Jerusalem. And then east would be anything, it would be all the Arab countries, Iraq, and then Iran, which is not Arab, but it's Muslim. And then you have India and Pakistan and Afghanistan and China and Asia. That's the east. And so everything is based on, the compass of the Bible is based on Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the center of the compass. So let's go on here. And nothing could fight this ram and the ram, but he did as he pleased and he magnified himself. In Daniel 8:4, then Daniel observes a male goat coming from the west. That would be from either America or from Europe. And he flew over the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn. He had one horn between his eyes. He came up to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and rushed at him in his mighty wrath. He struck the ram and shattered his two horns, and the ram had no strength to withstand him. So he hurled him to the ground, and there was none to rescue the ram from his power. That's Daniel 8, verse 5 through 7. Now, I told you originally in my first show that there's going to be a Western nation, and you can go to my YouTube channel, For Zion's Sake Ministries YouTube, watch my first show. I'll tell you about this Western nation, because the war hadn't started yet when I told you about it. But that Western nation turns out to be America. So let's go back to this. So theologians tell us that what we see here in this battle between this goat and this ram is a prophecy of Alexander the Great, the ruler of Macedonia, who defeated Darius III, the king of Persia, in 331 BC at the age of 22, and conquered an empire and spanned from Greece to the border of India. However, there are elements of the story that indicate that it's not just a prophecy about Alexander the Great, but another powerful Western ruler in modern times who would defeat armies of another Medo-Persian empire, a similar but more dramatic way. So in other words, Daniel used Alexander because he was more closer to his time, so he used him as an example to explain to us end-time events. Now you say, Rabbi Joe, how can that be? Well, Daniel is an end-time prophet. If you look in Daniel 7, verse 1, he talks about the beast of Revelation 13. If you look in Daniel 7, he talks about the judgment, the great white throne judgment, where the books, the book of life, the book of deeds, the book of words, the book of thoughts, they're all going to be open. And God's going to judge us for our thoughts, for our deeds, for our words, and he's going to look and see if our name is in the book of life. All those books are open in Daniel 7. And you see one like a son of man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. That's Jesus Christ. And then in chapter 12, Daniel, the angel Gabriel tells Daniel, seal up the books, close the books. The only other prophet to see the books open in Revelation 20 is John the Revelator, St. John, John the Apostle. So Daniel, what's my point is that Daniel is an end-time prophet. And Daniel 8 is an end-time prophecy. And we're going to get to that more as we go on. So let's go on. So, however, so there are elements of the story of Daniel that in Daniel 8, elements of the story that indicate it's not just about Alexander the Great, but it's about another powerful Western ruler in modern times who would defeat the armies of a modern Persian empire, similar to Alexander the Great, but in a different way in his vision. Now the text goes on in Daniel 8 to say that once the male goat from the west destroys the two-horned ram of Medo-Persia, the male goat magnifies himself exceedingly. But as soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken, and in its place there came up four conspicuous horns, weaker nations, toward the four winds of heaven. In Daniel 8:8, we can see from the angel Gabriel's interpretation of the vision that it encompasses events far beyond those of Alexander the Great. Gabriel comes to interpret the vision for Daniel. Now, let me say this to you. If Daniel, a prophet, needed an angel to interpret a vision, how much more do we need help? How much more do we need God to help us understand prophecy if a prophet needed an angel? All right, let's read on. So when the angel Gabriel appears to Daniel, somewhere around verse 15 of Daniel 8, he says, appears to Daniel, he gave us some very important clues about the fulfillment of the prophecy. Although the vision given to Daniel is clearly about Alexander the Great, when checking the details of the text, we find some problems. First of all, the angel Gabriel tells us twice that the vision that Daniel has does not pertain to that time, but pertains to the time of the end. And when he says it in Hebrew, it's the La'et Ketz, meaning the very end of this age. The very final end, the time of the indignation. That's what he's saying. And that's the angel Gabriel talking, not Joe Bell. Daniel 8, read verse 17 and 19. He's telling David that the war with Iran, with Persia, which is modern Iran, takes place at the end of the age. Okay, so the history of Alexander the Great occurred from 333 to 323 BC, approximately 2,350 years ago. Alexander the Great's fulfillment of Daniel chapter 8 did not occur at the end time, did it? It occurred 2,350 years ago. So right there we can tell that Alexander is not what the fulfillment of the prophecy. The fulfillment of the prophecy is this war that we're in right now with Iran. Okay, let's move on. Secondly, the vision describes the Medo-Persian Empire as a two-horned ram, which means that there would be two kings over Persia, except in the time of Alexander the Great, there was only one king, and his name was Darius the third, and he was the sole king of Medo-Persia. So that gives us a problem, because in the modern time of war, there's more than one ruler. There's the president of Iran, and then there's the Ayatollah. There's the spiritual leader, and there's the political leader. Then there's generals. We don't know. We know one is the Ayatollah, one horn. I'm not sure. We're not sure if the second horn is a military leader or if it's a president. We don't quite know at this point who's leading Iran. Okay, so let's go on. But the key point to know is that in modern times, there's two leaders, but in Daniel's time or Alexander's time, there was only one king of Persia who made all the decisions. He was the sole power. He made all the decisions. So right there, you can tell it's not talking about ancient Persia or ancient Alexander the Great. It's talking about now. All right, let's go on. Alexander's historic battle with Medo-Persia involved just one enemy king, Darius III. So we're left wondering, who is the second horn of modern times? As I mentioned, it's either the president or a general. Lastly, Alexander's army, though fast-moving, did not fly over the whole earth as it is described in the text without touching the ground. And we read in Daniel 8, verse 5, it says, when the war begins, therefore it says, the male goat from the west grew very great. Verse 5. As I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Folks, that took place, that prophecy was fulfilled last summer on June 22nd when the United States under Donald Trump sent two B-2 bombers, or two or three, into Iran and bombed Isfahan, Fardo, and Natanz, the three underground nuclear sites in Iran, and we did it without touching the ground. I don't think Trump knew the prophecy here. He just did it. And the planes refueled 2 or 3 times in the air. They never landed. They came from the United States. They flew to Iran, and they flew back without ever touching the ground. Okay? So that's, Alexander didn't fly, but our military does. And so it's more likely that the prophecy's talking about now. So let's go on. Okay. This imagery clearly alludes to an ability to wage war from the air, which is only possible in modern times. Because of these discrepancies, we are left to conclude that the prophecy has a dual fulfillment and is a type and shadow of end-time events still to come. So if you look at a map of Medo-Persian Empire in the time of Daniel, it extended from Libya in North Africa to Israel, Turkey, Cyprus, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, among other countries like modern Armenia. The ram's horn representing the Medes, and the longer horn, the Medes was northern Iran, and the south was Persia. Today it's just all Iran, okay? There's no Media. Northern Iran is Iran. Southern Iran is Iran. There's no Medo-Persia anymore. It's just Iran. As I looked at the map, the ancient map, it immediately dawned upon me who these horns represent in modern times. Now, when I wrote this, a coalition of 20 terrorist organizations pledged allegiance to a group called ISIS, which was Donald Trump destroyed ISIS, which was a very dangerous terrorist group. And during his first term, Donald Trump decimated ISIS and totally weakened them, destroyed their leader, al-Bakr. I can't remember his full name, but it's al-Bakr. He was destroyed by Donald Trump, and ISIS has been destroyed. They're still around, but they're not anywhere near as powerful as they used to be. Donald Trump took care of them, as I said, according to prophecy, as I said he would, that he would defeat ISIS. Nuclear war or invasion. Much of the world today, especially Israel, is very concerned about the possibility of Iran pulling off a nuclear attack. But this prophecy in Daniel 8 paints a different picture. The biblical problem concerning Iran is that there's no reference in the Bible to indicate that Israel is ever attacked or engaged in a nuclear battle. You know, the chant today, from the river to the sea, in other words, from the Jordan River to the ocean, push Israel into the sea. But Jesus is coming back to Jerusalem. If you read Zechariah 14, Jesus will set foot on the Mount of Olives. Ezekiel 43:7 and Luke 1 tell us he's going to sit on David's throne. Luke 1 and Ezekiel 47:3. He's going to sit in the temple on David's throne forever in Jerusalem. So Israel cannot be nuked. And that's why God has sent America to protect Israel, just like David was sent to kill Goliath. America is Israel's defender, and that's our greatest spiritual role. Now, it's clear to me that God will not allow Iran to attack Israel with nuclear weapons. Nowhere does the Bible say that Israel is wiped off the map. In fact, Jeremiah 30, verse 10, 11, 12 tell us that Israel is the only country to survive in the end times. Every other nation will be destroyed. Now, I'm going to stop there for today as far as teaching, but what I want to say to you, and we'll pick up more next week, is that what I'm reading to you about this war with Iran, I wrote 11 years ago. I predicted the war with Iran 11 years ago. I predicted that we would bomb them from the air without touching the ground 11 years ago. This is an 11-year-old article, and if you'd like a copy of it for your love gift of $10 or more, I'll send you a copy of it. For your love gift of $35 or more, I'll send you the original sermons, 4 sermons about it that I gave back in 2016. One was at a national conference. I'll send that to you for your love gift of $35 or more. And I want to tell you about our prophecy conference. You can still sign up. It's going to be June 12th and 13th at Meadowview. Go to For Zion's Sake conference, ForZion'sSakeConference.com. ForZion'sSakeConference.com. Shalom. God bless you.
You've been watching Bible Prophecy Now with Rabbi Joe Bell. Please join us next week at this same time and place for more regarding today's world events and prophecy. To contact Rabbi Bell, please go to www.forzionsake.org. Rabbi Bell's mailing address is For Zion's Sake Ministries, P.O. Box 1486, Bristol, Tennessee 37620. Until next week, Shalom.